Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today's talk is a continuation of something Steve and I brainstormed about last year. Steve and I feel incredibly fortunate to have collected an outstanding team of coaches. And among all of our coaches, we have a vast and diverse knowledge base. So these talks that we've been doing are a way for uphill athletes to share our experiences, as well as to introduce you to who we all are at Uphill Athlete beyond just Steve and myself. If you enjoy these talks, be sure to check out our video library on the website, where you'll also see these things housed on our YouTube channel. And you'll find a lot more in-depth information that both supplements and expands upon both the books and the articles on the website. A quick introduction we don't need much of an introduction, I'm sure, for Steve. Steve House and I have been partners in Uphill Athlete, and some of you may know the history of our partnership as kind of coach athlete that goes back roughly 20 years now. And I coached Steve through the bulk of his professional alpinist career. And he went on, as many of you know, to complete some pretty remarkable ascents. And we, as an outcome of that, his career being as successful as it was, we decided to start writing this stuff down in the form of a book. But John will be probably a little bit less known to many of you, but interestingly, there's no American climber that is known more for the smash and grab style of alpinism than our very own coach, John Frieh. So this style of climbing means that John would build his fitness, track the weather, and buy last-minute tickets to Alaska. Once there, he'd fly into the mountain, climb, and fly out ASAP so he could get back to work. He climbed the first ascent of the west ridge of Burkett Needle over the 4th of July weekend in 2009. And since then, he's taken 20 trips to Alaska, averaging 3 days per trip. And about half have resulted in first ascents, including the notable first winter ascent of Mount Huntington via the French Ridge, done in the same style. So in this talk, John and Steve are going to dive into the nuts and bolts of this style of climbing. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to those guys. Take it away, guys.
Great, thank you. I'm going to come back with just John and I here on the screen for a minute. And we're going to talk, first off, I want to start, John, just by thanking you for doing this. And I think it's going to be really interesting for a lot of people. Why don't you talk about what this is? Let's just define our terms. Let's start by defining what smash and grab climbing means. What is that? What is it?
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Scott, for the introduction. I don't know if it's all true, but I'm just the guy that likes to climb like everyone else. And where the term came from, not that we didn't invent this, Scott mentioned in 2009, I was in Southeast Alaska, specifically the Stikine ice cap, and a climber there by the name of Dieter Close. He's kind of the local living legend that's done everything. He commented to, at the time, my partner and I, Dave Burdick, he made this offhand comment saying essentially, you guys think you can come in here and smash and grab a first ascent and just walk away with it. And to be honest, we didn't know. We weren't sure if it was possible. We didn't know if we were maybe overestimating our abilities, but it turns out we got lucky. Everybody loves a 5.8 first ascent in Alaska, no less. And kind of as a little bit as a joke, a little bit as a pay some respect to Dieter, we chose to name the route Smash and Grab. And Smash and Grab at the time, we didn't really think like, oh, we're inventing this new style of climbing. It was more like this was a solution to really solve the problem of, we want to climb this thing. It rains here a lot. I don't want to sit in a tent for 4 weeks. How can we do this and get back to the real world, to our other life commitments, And so that was kind of where the term came from. It's, you know, we were definitely not the first to do it. We will definitely not be the last to do it. I've had okay success with it in my climbing career, whatever you want to call what I've been doing for the last 10 years. But that's kind of where the term came from.
Great. Yeah, and I just wanted to take one quick moment to say that we just were a little sensitive to the unfortunate timing of this week's talk about a style of climbing that's been called smash and grab for 20, 30 years. And, you know, obviously the peaceful demonstrations that have in some cases turned into looting this week. That was just an unfortunate coincidence. And we've had this plan for weeks and it happened to land on this week. So apologies if anyone's feeling like that's insensitive. So why don't you take us a little bit through the genesis of some of your climbing with this? I know you have some pictures you'd like to share, and just a little bit. I think this lays the groundwork for some of the things that you have done, and shows people a little bit what is possible and what has been accomplished in style, and then we'll dig into the nuts and bolts of actually how to apply it, how to do it. Let's see some of these.
Let's do, so I'll do a quick, oh, how come I can't share anything? Have I been promoted, Scott?
You're co-host.
For some reason I can't share my Zoom.
You'll have your screen share button at the bottom. Okay, I'm making full host, see if that changes anything. Sorry, guys, we did do a technical check earlier and this all worked.
Yeah, and it's not popping up, Steve. Do you think it's because you're recording?
No. So you don't have this button to share screen at the bottom, huh?
I've got the share screen, but it's not showing my my keynote.
Okay, people, sorry about this. Let me see. We're gonna have to dig into something here.
Hey, John, is it showing your desktop when you share the screen?
It's not showing anything. I click share screen and it's not.
We haven't had this happen before, folks, so
A new problem.
sorry about this. I'm not seeing anything in my preferences about allowing or not allowing you to share your screen.
Not giving me the option to share it. Like I see the button, Steve, and I'm not seeing I can't click share.
Boy, that's the problem.
Guys, what about having John send or share, put in Dropbox the slideshow, and then Steve could try sharing that from his desktop.
Yeah, can you try sending that to me, John? And then in the meantime, you can start talking a little bit about the first.
Let me try and do that.
So while you do that, John, let me just try to fill the dead airspace here. One of the things that I think is going to be, we want to illustrate here in this first section is the types of climbs that that are doable, and they tend to fit a archetype. You know, let's say they're quickly accessible, and in Alaska that's mostly by ski-equipped bush plane, of course, and a lot of you will be familiar with that. And then also they're, you know, somebody mentioned they're not at a very high altitude, and then a lot of them tend to be, you know, just routes of a scale that you can do in 1 or 2 days, maximum 3 days. Most of these, as John will say, he's been working on doing these as a with a 3-day window, because you could, as he'll mention at this time, most of this time he was doing this, he was working for Intel and, had set vacation, but he could take a Friday or Monday off and it would go really unnoticed. So he could grab that one extra day, get on a plane late at night, get up there in the morning, get in, fly on, start climbing immediately, maybe have one bivvy, get back down. And then, with a sat phone or a in-reach device, you can let the pilot know you're down and have a pickup and get out before the weather turns. So this is also practicable in other places besides Alaska. I mean, I've actually done it myself in the Canadian Rockies just by driving up. Most notably, probably in 2007 when I climbed a route that I've been trying to climb for a bunch of years on the Emperor Face on Mount Robson. And that was done. I was in Oregon at the time, and I just basically did everything John's going to tell you about. But then instead of flying up, I drove up. It's like a 14-hour drive, something like that, up to Mount Robson from Central Oregon. So we were able to do something like that. In that case, we used a helicopter to get us in, to skip the long approach, because we only had, like, in that case, about a 24-hour of good weather. And we were able to pull it off and get up and down. And then we hiked out. So those are kind of typical things. It's also not uncommon for people to do these sorts of things in the Alps. And I've seen this quite a bit myself, having climbed in the Alps quite a bit, where things will, especially things like the Eiger North Face, the North Face of the Matterhorn, the routes on the North Face of the Grand Juras, the conditions are pretty finicky and they come and go pretty quickly. And, the problem with that is you're almost never the only one watching the weather and the conditions on the North Face of the Eiger, for example, in late September, early October. So my advice to people is it's better to be a little early than a little late, because if you're late, you're going to be the 10th party in line and you're not going to have any place to bivvy and so forth. So it's better to be kind of on the front end of those kinds of things, if that's possible. John, were you able to get that sent to me somehow?
I'm sending it to you right now. I'm hoping it's through the chat. Hopefully you'll get this. It looks like it's still pushing it through. I think all those pictures, though, didn't do us any favors.
Okay.
John, I did send you a Dropbox link to a folder there. If you can upload
an
it.
Email might work too.
I don't know if it's too big to email.
I could probably talk to this stuff without slides initially.
Why don't you go ahead and start with talking about that, if you think that's sending through.
Keep me posted.
And the other thing that you could talk about, like, we could just skip ahead, like I wanted to ask you about how you plan a smash and grab and how you pick a group of climbs. And this isn't coming through chat yet, but if you want to try to send it another way, then you can.
It's almost there. I think it's almost there, Steve.
Oh, I got it. Okay. Yeah, 135 megabytes. Yeah, Ian, Skyward will certainly be running
Can you present that? I'll talk to it. Could we do it that way?
Excuse me?
You present that file I just sent you, share your screen, and I'll talk to it?
Yeah, we'll do that. And you'll just have to tell me when you want me to advance. It's downloading right now. Yeah, Skyward's, we're back open for business. We have people in the field actually this week for some mountaineering training. So we are here in Colorado, we're able to get out with small groups. Also in the Black Canyon, although it's getting a bit hot. And some of the other stuff we do is opening up. So this is going to be a couple more seconds. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how to plan a smash and grab, the research component of this, and then the role of training and fitness. And then we're going to dive into the weather, which is one of the bigger components of that. Why don't you talk while I'm getting this set up, John, why don't you talk a little bit about the research component AJ,
So
guidebooks, people, logistics, that stuff.
kind of what I talked about. We were talking about in '09. I did the first Son of the West Ridge of Burkett Needle, and kind of to back up a couple of years, like I grew up climbing in the Cascades, you know, where Uphill Athlete is arguably based foundation, and I think like a lot of people listening to this, you know, I also aspired to go to the greater ranges. I wanted to go to Alaska. These big, beautiful pictures. Would go to slideshows or tune into things like this and be like, wow, that looks so cool. I wonder if I could ever do that someday. And kind of what started it for me, or what formulated the question, was in '06, Joe Puyer's book. There it is. There we go. Timing. Alaska Climbs came out, and I actually went to Joe's book release party at Feathered Friends in Seattle, and you know, bought the book, was super excited. Joe showed all these awesome photos of all the things you can do in Alaska. Got home, and as I flipped through it, honestly became really depressed. If you look through Joe's book, you know, he talks about on just about every climb, when he's kind of describing the climb, you know, one of the first things is total time. And the total time, it seemed like every single one I looked at was 1 to 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks, or longer, you know, 14 to 21 days. And for me, that was kind of essentially a deal breaker to start with. At the time, I was working at Intel. I worked for Intel after finishing up at university, and they're a computer company, if you don't know who they are. And Intel essentially gave 3 weeks of vacation a year. That was it. Couldn't roll it over, couldn't take unpaid leave. It was 3 weeks. And for me, looking at the guidebook, I was like, well, wait a second. Like, if I need 2 weeks to do this climb, there's the bulk of my vacation right there. Even if I go do the climb, I'm not going to be ready for the climb because I'm not going to be climbing before the trip because I don't have enough vacation. And so really I remember being super bummed, and I kind of put the book on my shelf and forgot about it. And that was 2006. And then out of the blue, 2007, next slide, this hooligan, everybody knows Mr. Colin Halley. He's featured prominently in both books. He's climbed a lot with both Steve and Scott. Colin, on spring break, instead of doing what most university students do and go to, you know, Mexico and consume vast amounts of alcohol, Colin decided to go to Alaska and climb with another kind of underground crusher, Jed Brown. And their original plan was to go to Valdez and just climb waterfall ice. And if you don't know, spring break's a week for, you know, at least us in the States. And so Colin showed up in March, and the weather had been really good. And so Jed and Colin said, hey, maybe we should go in. You know, Huntington's never been climbed in winter. Maybe we should go in. So Colin went in, and lo and behold, you know, a couple days in, next slide, Colin and Jed made the first winter ascent of Huntington in less than 24 hours. I think it was like 15 hours on route. I could be wrong, but just flew up it. And so this really grabbed my attention because it was not only had they'd only spent a week there, but they had picked a week in advance, went, and were able to do this climb that the same guidebook says takes 1 to 2 weeks. And so that really kind of got me thinking again about, well, I'll never be as good as Colin, but maybe I can use his strategy if the conditions come together. And so if you click the next one, you can see there's Huntington right there, big, beautiful line. If you're wondering about the sun shadow line, we'll actually talk about this later in this presentation. And then on that same trip, you know, that was Colin only needed a couple days for Huntington. On the next slide, they went and did the first ascent of this face, Mount Abercrombie, I believe, which was just another like leftover route to do in Alaska. And so this was, I think, at least for me, it wasn't the first time someone had done a fast in and out climb, but for me, this was like, oh, it finally kind of got through my thick head, like this might be a possibility. And so I started looking for the opportunities to go to Alaska. And part of what I realized I needed to do was trying to on-site this without ever being there. It was just poor judgment. Like there's just too many variables. And so on number 6, Steve, I did my first trip to Alaska in 2009 with Doug Shepard. We did kind of the same thing Colin had done. We picked a week on the calendar and said, we're going to go on this week. We accept that, you know what, the weather might be bad. We might never get out of Talkeetna. We might spend our whole time at the Fairview and the Rib, you know, passing time. But we got some weather. We were able to go in and do 2 routes. We did Wake Up on Wake and then the elevator shaft on Johnson, and really kind of just learned a lot of the logistics of what does it mean to be in Alaska? Like, you know, everyone's got these funny tents, you know, the mega mids, like, oh, it turns out you should have one of those. And why camp booties are a non-essential essential. And so that was my first trip in 2009. And then later that year in 2009, number 7, you can see this was kind of what we started the presentation with. The west ridge of that pointy thing on the left, that's Burkett Needle. And then the one on the right is Mount Burkett. This is a different part of Alaska, but this is very close to the Devil's Thumb, if anyone's familiar with that. And I was able to kind of do my second trip over 4th of July weekend and do the first ascent of that left-hand skyline. That was kind of where at least Dieter made the joke to us, like, oh, you think you can just smash and grab. And so that was kind of the start for me, at least, of can we do these climbs fast? Let's try and do it. Slide 8's another kind of picture of the needle. From the other side, that's on this one, you can see kind of the right-hand skyline is what we climbed. You can actually see way back in the background, that's the Devil's Thumb. And then kind of on the right is the cat ears and the witch's tits. On page 9, I was back in Alaska for a long weekend climbing waterfall ice in Valdez. This was 2011. And at the airport, I saw a guy with a backpack that I recognized that was made in Portland, Oregon. And I kind of teased the guy a little about, oh, did it take 6 months for that backpack to come to you, knowing that guy who had made it was a very busy guy and usually slow at delivering backpacks on time. And got to talking to the guy and traded information with him. It turned out he was a local climber in Alaska who lived in Fairbanks, which is kind of north of the Central Park, if you don't know Alaska, and just kept in contact with him. And lo and behold, a few months later, in March of 2011, the weather got really good again in Alaska. And essentially, I called all my other partners and everyone said, March in Alaska, that sounds really cold and stupid. And so the trick is you want to call someone that likes the cold, someone that lives in Fairbanks. And so I called this Jason guy and we ended up going into Huntington, you can see here. And we basically repeated what Colin and Jed had done way back in 2007. We did the same route as them. We did it in winter and we did the second winter ascent to Huntington. And that was kind of years after doing the very first one for me, which was 2009, realizing that I could actually probably do this in Alaska with the right requirements. And so we can kind of just scroll through fast, Steve. Like 11 is, you know, soloing in the dark. Here's 12 is the west face couloir. 13 is the top of the west face couloir. If you've ever climbed Huntington, you kind of turn the corner and head for the summit. This is kind of cruising around. This is March in Alaska. And so after this in 2011, I partially, because I realized that this strategy worked, but honestly, the bigger part is it's not that I would have loved to stay in Alaska longer, but because I was working at Intel, because I had 2 very young children at home, you know, short, fast trips were really the solution that I found to be able to climb the routes or climb the mountains I wanted to climb while still respecting the other life choices I had made, having a career, having a family. And so this was kind of my solution to really doing both. And turns out other people can do it too. And so this is Mount Dickey in the Ruth Gorge. I've done 2 first ascents on this. Page 16 is back in the Stikine. There's the Devil's Thumb, Burkett Needle on the right. The left is Mount Burkett. Did a first ascent on that kind of main face there. On 17 is the Witch's Tit. Did the left-hand skyline in like a 3-day weekend. Not all of these have been first ascents on 18. This was actually 2 years ago. Saw a good weather window that lined up with the weekend. And one of my good partners that I've climbed with for years, Doug Shepard, he and we kind of talked to our favorite pilot, Paul at Talkeetna Air Taxi, and he said, yeah, Shaken Not Stirred looks to be in. It's a route I've always wanted to do. It's in Joe's guidebook, and we zipped in there and were able to climb Shaken Not Stirred in like essentially 3 days from the lower 48 to Alaska and back. And so at some point along the way, the term kind of became adopted by the industry, and you can see on 19, like, I should have trademarked it so Black Diamond could pay me royalties, but I wasn't smart enough. And so now everybody uses that term. And on 20, kind of the culmination for me, and another example of applying smash and grab was, maybe there's a route you've seen that you've always wanted to do. You think that it looks amazing. For me, on 20, it's the French Ridge of Mount Huntington. It's that sun snow line. This was actually the very first ascent of the mountain by, pardon my French, Terre, back in the 60s, I believe. And I've always wanted to do this route. But I also am not a big fan of double cornices. I think that they are very unsettling, to put it politely. And so I knew that if I could catch this mountain in the right conditions, low snow year, early in the season before a lot of the snow had fallen, I could probably get up the ridge fast if I didn't have to deal with a bunch of double cornices. And that's exactly what we did. We waited and waited. And in 2014, I bugged Paul yet again at TAT, and he said the ridge looks good. And so we flew up. You can actually see it here in the picture 21. And it looked good. So we zipped in 22. There's Paul, he's the man. And one of the advantages of smash and grab is you don't have to bring a lot with you. We just brought basically our bags for the route, which is kind of the opposite of most people's Alaska experience. And we instantly started climbing when we got there. You can see on 24 and 25, it's a big, long, beautiful ridge. This was where maybe the fitness conversation that we'll come back to later is, if you're not as fit as you should be, or if you perhaps underestimate the conditions, you won't move as fast on the route, and you might be rewarded with a second bivvy on the mountain you weren't planning on, which for us, we made the summit, but we also made the summit as the sun was going down. So I got to enjoy a bivvy at above 12,000 feet in the Alaska winter, which was a memorable cold bivvy. Not as cold as it was this is Brad, whose zipper on his sleeping bag actually broke en route. So he had an extra cold one. And so just, this was my second time up Huntington in winter. So I just talked a whole lot. Shall we talk about who can do this?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And we've already kind of covered, you've covered a lot of this stuff. So yeah, let's talk about who this is for, and maybe who it's not for. Where.
So I think this smash and grab is for anyone that is either time limited, which arguably is all of us. You know, unless you're what's the polite word, underemployed. But if you are, you probably don't have the money for an expedition. But all of us have other commitments. And so the other piece is, if you think about the way you climb, you're always going to climb the route as fast as you can. It's a safety thing, you know, like, sure, we stop and take pictures and hang out, but in general, when we climb mountains, we do it as fast as possible. Smash and grab essentially extends that concept to the approach and the exit. And so you're just doing the whole thing a little faster. This could work for really anyone that has, most importantly, the fitness, which we'll probably talk about a little more here in a second. And also, more importantly, the experience. If you haven't done a lot of ice climbing, or maybe have only done some top roping and ouray as an example, I understand ham and eggs is a beautiful route, but you probably need more experience before you can smash and grab the route. Or you need to go with, say, a guide or a competent partner that can kind of carry the workload for you.
What do you think about the idea of someone having had to do a couple of trips in an area like Alaska to kind of sort of cut their teeth, get to know the logistics, get to know the area, the mountain range, what they need, what they don't need? Do you think, how important do you think that is?
I would argue, I won't go as far as to say it's a requirement, but it's very strongly suggested. For me in 2009, my first trip to Alaska, we didn't use a compressed timeline. We only spent, we still, it's shorter than most people's first trip. We took a week, but I purposely went with a partner that I had been climbing with that also had been to Alaska the year prior. And so he knew a lot of the logistics around, oh, we want to bring this, we don't want this. It takes 3 hours to drive to Talkeetna, all those little things that maybe you won't read in a guidebook.
Yeah.
That
John,
said,
I would go so far as to say that it is a requirement. I know you're trying to be nice to people, but I think if you show up in a range you've never been in before, those are always the most dangerous trips, let's say. Like if you've not been to Alaska before, you're not going to appreciate some of the objective hazards, like cornices, double cornices that you mentioned earlier, snow conditions. There's a bunch of things that I think are unique to each place. And until you get to know any particular range, whether it's the Alps or the Canadian Rockies or the Alaska range, or the Himalaya, the Karakoram, different regions of those bigger ranges, I mean, they all have their own little peculiarities and own little risks. So I think that it's important to be familiar with those things. How do you pick the climbs? Like, I know you told me earlier in our discussions that you usually have kind of an A-B list of objectives.
So there's always the wish list. We've all got the dream list of like, oh man, wouldn't it be amazing to climb that route? Like, who doesn't want to climb the Cassine? So we've got your list, but you can cross the Cassine off, because unless you live somewhere that I'm unaware of, you're not going to be acclimated for that route. Now, what about the Moonflower Buttress? That would be an amazing smash and grab that I think, honestly, I'm tempted to try someday. I've never got the chance. And so everybody's got their wish list. That said, if you're going to spend the money and really, because most people can only do 1 or maybe 2 smash and grab trips per season anyways, especially if you're limited in the amount of time you can get away from your home life. My suspicion is that most people, if they're going to roll the dice, they probably want to climb something. And so what I generally recommend to people is go somewhere where there's more than one option, because though you're going to do your best with the weather and conditions, you don't actually know what you're going to get until you land on the glacier. You don't actually know until you're there. So using Alaska as an example, maybe you want to climb Ham and Eggs. Maybe that's one of your dream climbs. Yes, you could fly into the Root Canal, which is the glacier just below the route. It's the closest landing strip to the route. However, let's say you're the first team in that season, you land in the Root Canal and you find out like, oh no, there hasn't been good freeze thaw yet. There's no ice on the ice pitches. I'm not going to be able to climb Ham and Eggs. At that point, there's not really any other routes from that landing strip to do. So either you got to call for a bump, which cost you more money. Or had you flown to Dickey Camp, which is, yes, a little farther away from Ham and Eggs, but down near a lot of other climbs that are of similar skill level and commitment level, you can have more options to choose from. So commonly when I go to Alaska, unless I am highly confident, which is going to come from my analysis of the weather and conditions and talking to the pilot, that the route I want to do is in, I generally tend to hedge what I'm going to do and fly to a location that allows me multiple options, because I rather climb something than try something that I don't get up because I misinterpreted the conditions.
Yeah,
So that's
a good point.
kind of my
I want to
approach
add
when
to people that they should be respectful. In some of these routes, there's essentially a queue. And when I climbed the Moonflower, I was one of 4 parties on the glacier to do it. And we all organized, those 4 parties all kind of got together and we organized ourselves. So we basically took turns and had some spacing between our attempts. And somebody flew on in the middle of the night the morning I was starting with my partner and jumped in front of us. And I thought that was very rude. So I think that it's worth being respectful. It's not only rude, it put me and my partner in danger, because now we had these people dropping giant ice chunks on us for the next 2 days. So
I think you would agree
you
that
got to
happens.
be respectful of some of these more crowded routes. And if you're going to go to the Moonflower in the middle of the high season for the Moonflower, well, you know, you couldn't be sure there'll be other people there. Yeah, so I think that's great. Let's talk a little bit let's dive into the role of training and building fitness and talking about how to best approach that. You know, within the books that Scott and I have written and the coaching you do, you know, we often talk about having an annual training plan. How do you look at the smash and grab season and the training in terms of your big picture?
First and foremost, you need that annual training plan. You know, it's June right now. You know, it's kind of been a time warp for all of us, I think. But literally, if you were thinking about Alaska, like if you saw some photos that we were showing earlier that I kind of screwed up, but if you saw some stuff and you're like, wow, that's a beautiful route, really starting now or July would actually give you the best possible chances to be ready for Alaska next spring. Now, I know that seems kind of, well, that's a long lead time, John, but there's to be an alpinist by definition has a lot of different skill sets that they need to really hone. And on top of that, you need your fitness. You've got to have that aerobic base. You've got to have the sport specific stuff. You've got to have the leg muscle endurance for hiking uphill. And so building that plan now to be ready for next spring is pretty critical. The other piece is, and we kind of talked about this earlier, having that relevant experience. The training needs to transfer to the task. The further apart the two are, the less transferability to the task, and the less transferability, the more likely that you're going to fail on that. It's why a good example, I think, is in the books you guys talk about, you know, is riding a bike good for your aerobic fitness? Yes, no one's going to argue that. However, because riding a bike versus trail running, it's not as close to what you do when you climb. It's why we always preach, you know, you should be trail running or on a treadmill. To extending that example, going ice climbing in Ouray is fun and I enjoy it and I love it and do it. I believe you do too, Steve.
Of course.
However, top roping pitches at Ouray that are hacked out and, you know, a little easy in the sunshine is not going to transfer as well as, say, going to Cody, Wyoming and climbing pitch after pitch of untracked ice and slogging deep snow in between each pitch. One of those is a lot more like Alaska than the other. And so the more you practice what you anticipate you will encounter, the better. Doesn't mean everyone needs to go to Cody, even though I love it and have a soft spot in my heart for it. But you need to think about, am I doing what I'm expecting to be doing? Doing that will also allow you to really optimize the kit. I try and climb in as close to possible the same stuff I'm going to use in Alaska. Like if you can only climb water ice 4 in your skinny boots and mono points with thin gloves on a sunshine day, you're not ready for ham and eggs. Even though ham and eggs is water ice 4 also, they're very different beasts when you put on double boots and, dual point crampons, and you got a pack on your back. You need to really think about how well does this correlate? And so all those aspects need to be integrated into your training program, which is why having that conversation with your coach about, this is my goal. What do I need to do in between now and that goal to make sure that when the opportunity comes, I'm ready to go? We all kind of have, and this is, unless you're doing a complete first ascent, but even then, a lot of the coaches have a good sense of when certain routes are in shape. If you're going to go to the Ruth Gorge, we can pretty much say you're going to go in April, probably the 3rd week. Using that as your event or your competition day, you build the program backwards from when you think you're going to go.
Great.
So
I think those are all, it's kind of hitting on basically the specificity of training, and as we get closer to our event, we want our training to look more and more like our event. That's a standard principle of training that we all use and talk about. So should we dive into some weather? I think there's a lot of really good stuff here. And a lot of people are going to be curious about this. You ready for that?
Let's do it.
I've got this it came through as a PDF, so apologies for the way the screen looks, but I think this gets us started. We'll start with the NOAA website here.
So NOAA, and this is going to be, I apologize to those of you in Europe. I know some of my athletes are tuning in, but NOAA is the best tool for us in the States. I'm sure there is a European equivalent. A subset of NOAA on the next page is the National Weather Service, NWS. And if you go to weather.gov, this is the website, and they show essentially all the different zones they break the United States into. As you can see, Alaska's missing, but what... It's up. Oh, there it is. Okay. It's not nearly as prominently displayed. And so also what NWS does, and I think I showed this on the next slide, is they also have weather offices for locations. Here's the one for Portland where I live. Why they have it, I don't know. It just tells everyone it rains here all the time. But one of interest, especially if you have goals to climb in Alaska, is the one out of Anchorage, which is the next slide. And as you can see here, you can see Anchorage kind of prominently located down there. And then as you drive the cursor up, you've got, if you know your Alaska geography, that's Wasilla there. I hear you can see Russia from Wasilla, I've been told. And then you've got the dot way up there is Talkeetna. And if it isn't already clear to you, Alaska is very big, and I'm sure everyone has experienced this. The weather can vary greatly from, just a few hundred miles. Like we've all heard about like the rain shadow effect. Oh, it's raining in Portland, but it's sunny at Smith Rock. These things happen in the mountains. And so you can use the NWS site. And why I showed this slide was that each of those kind of funny shaped boxes, that is the National Weather Service's attempt at really kind of forming areas to forecast for. As you can see, some of those boxes are very big. And so weathermen and women try and avoid being wrong. And so they're going to issue a forecast for that area based on what they think is a good encompassing forecast for the entire area. Now, we all know if the area is very big, if it's going to snow in some parts of the area but not in others, the weather person is probably going to say, oh, expect some snow. Because generally when people read the forecast, people get more mad if it snows when it was forecasted to be sunny versus, oh, they forecasted snow, but it was sunny today. Oh, they were wrong, but I was okay with it. And this happens a lot with any forecast, but especially Alaska, where essentially they're hedging their bets for not being wrong, I think would be the best way to say it. You can also see up there on the upper left, you can enter the location, city and street or zip code. So that's where you could actually type, instead of clicking these boxes like Talkeetna, Alaska, you could put that in there. Let's go to 37. And so this actually shows, if we were to click the zone forecast, so one of those big boxes for Talkeetna, this shows you what the forecast is. And this was actually this morning. And you can see today, numerous rain showers in the morning, then scattered rain showers and isolated thunderstorms in the afternoon, high in the mid 50s, 60s winds. So that entire area, that is what they felt was the best forecast that fit that whole area. If you've ever been to Alaska, you know that you can see Anchorage down there at the bottom and Denali up at the top in that little grid there. That's a big distance, and the weather is going to vary greatly across that. And so a much more accurate way to get the forecast would be to, on the next one, actually you can see there, this is the forecast for Talkeetna specifically. And you can see, you can kind of confirm that on the right there with, right there. So the forecast for that area is what they're showing. And so if you read there, they talk about showers likely, but it's mainly between 7 and 10 a.m. And then it's going to get better. So the zone forecast said, oh, it's just going to rain all day. The specific forecast said it's only going to rain in the morning. So what I'm trying to drive home here is the more specific you can be with your forecast source, the better understanding you will get of the weather. And because they have integrated Google Maps into NOAA, you can, with a little bit of work, essentially have point-click forecasts for the mountains you are interested in. If I could show you guys my bookmarks, you would see I have a point-click for Mount Huntington, a point-click for Mount Dickey, a point-click for the Moose's Tooth. I can just go through my bookmarks after, I spend a day setting them up and see what's the weather for each of these specific spots.
And we're going to, for everyone who's interested, we're going to create some basically show notes for this later. So we'll share a bunch of links on the original web page where this talk was promoted on the Uphill Athlete site. You want to look at the text, John?
Yeah, and so this part right now, well, actually go back real quick, Steve. This is telling you what's going on for your area. Now, if you were to ask someone to define what scattered showers is, or scattered showers, then isolated thunderstorms, but then also 30%, 20%, you'd get a lot of different answers. And when I started, in fact, even before I started going to Alaska, I would look at the weather for, say, Mount Hood. It's the local mountain close to Portland. And it would say 30% chance of something. What does that mean? Do I have a 3 in 10 chance I'm going to get snowed on? Or is it higher? If it snows, how much is it going to be? And so I think the one of the main points I want to make in this is that just looking at the weather doesn't mean you're going to learn it. You need to actually correlate what they're forecasting. What does that mean for you as a climber? Can you climb in, light snow flurries? Can you climb in 30-mile-an-hour winds? What's your limit? And then also, what is the limit for the pilot that needs to take you to where you're going to climb? It might be nice weather in the range, but if it's not nice weather in Talkeetna, does that mean that he can even fly you in? And so the best thing you can start doing with forecasting is start looking at it every day for somewhere that you can either go to or confirm what happened that day. For example, Mount Hood, which is close to, it's like a 1 to 2 hour drive from Portland. I can go there pretty regularly to see what is the weather. You know, they forecasted X. Is that what they actually got that day? Or if I can't go that day because I was working, is there a webcam I can look at, which Mount Hood has 3 different ski areas on it. It's got cameras for the roads. You can really get a good sense of like, was the forecast right? And what did it actually look like? And so it's kind of very similar to like with Training Peaks, where we're looking at the data every day. Same thing with weather. You're looking at the data every day to understand what's actually happening, what's coming through. This is the forecast moving forward. The other, and this honestly isn't a ton of information. Where you really want to look is there's a forecast discussion just below. It got cut off in my screenshot, which we can show Steve on page 39. There's a forecast discussion. And this is where the forecaster will actually talk about what they tried to understand. What information did they get that they look at to give you the forecast that they gave? The first year or so of me reading these, honestly, like I might have understood it, but a lot of times I didn't. And you can see they've got like blue words that are underlined. NOAA or NWS tries to make it as user-friendly as possible. And the more time you spend in the forecast discussion, the more you're going to start to learn not only weather, but you're also going to learn the kind of geographic features of where you're interested in climbing. You know, like they'll throw around different mountain ranges or different valleys in Alaska that maybe your guidebook doesn't mention, but you can start learning like, oh, the Copper River Basin is this. Will it actually affect my climb? And so this is where they talk about short-term and long-term, and they break it down based on either if it's within 72 hours or past 72 hours. And this is where, especially the long-term is where, this is where you want to be looking. This is where you want to know what's going to happen with the weather, because if you need to jump on plane tickets, you need to know before the forecast is actually here. And so in this one, this is a classic, like not surprising. The big story is the high pressure that will become entrenched over the mainland. Long-range models are suggesting this feature could persist through the first week, May, possibly longer. You can tell I took this one in April sometime. Thus expect overall warm, dry, mostly sunny conditions. So this is another way of saying, get to the airport with bags now. This is the time to go. Now, it won't always be this clear, but this, and you won't, maybe it's as you're learning the weather, you won't actually, let's say you didn't know this. You were like, entrenched over the mainland, dry. It sounds okay, but I don't know. You want to be reading these forecasts and then seeing what actually happens 3 days later. And so you start to correlate, like they forecasted this is what the weather was. They forecasted this is what the weather was. And you'll start to learn like high pressure is a really good thing. So the forecast discussions I think are critical. And so, wow, what questions? I feel like I'm going on and on here.
So let me just say one thing that I think, interject one thing that I thought about when you were talking. I think that's really important to know in terms of exactly what you were saying, like what does 30% chance of showers mean? Does that mean it's going to be snow showers for 30% of the day? Does that mean you have a 3 in 10 chance of an actual shower for 1 minute? And then also knowing what you can climb in. One of the things that for me, I know has allowed me to be successful in Alaska is I have a pretty good feeling for the weather, the bad weather, the degree of bad weather in which I can climb in. A lot of people will wait for perfect bluebird, no wind weather, and they never climb anything because that almost never happens. And it's great when it does, but it usually doesn't happen. But I know that there's a bunch of imperfect weather that I can still climb in. And I also want to mention that it depends a lot on the route. Like if there's going to be like snow showers and I'm on a ridge, it's not a big deal. If I'm on a route like the Moonflower, for example, and there's any snowflake hits the face above me, I've basically got a spindrift avalanche going down the collar of my jacket. Like, you know, so there's different routes have different kinds of features. If you're on any kind of route that follows a funnel feature, and ice climbs almost always do because the water is funneled into a feature as it as it melts and refreezes. But there's a lot of other routes that don't follow that kind of feature. And you kind of also have to just look at what's above the route. Is there a big catchment area that's going to catch those snowflakes and funnel it down on you? Is there just a rock head wall that's protecting that part of the route? You have to look at that and have to understand what you could do. I've climbed Peak 11300, for example, I think like 5 or 6 times, and always in kind of bad weather. I mean, not really bad, but like always snow showers in the afternoon. In the Ruth Gorge, it snows almost every afternoon, most of the time. It just does. And that's just
for those who are unfamiliar with the route, it's a ridge.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really matter, minus maybe some route finding if it's too cloudy.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about, you're going to dive into some apps here. Let's talk about some apps.
Oh, so one more. I want to show number 40. This is my all-time favorite.
Oh, right.
So every once in a while, you'll come across an amazing forecast discussion. I don't know if this was the summer intern and his boss didn't check his work, but it makes me laugh, but it's also, there's some truth to this, and that what meteorologists are doing when they're forecasting is they have so much data in front of them. They've got satellites, they've got, every type of model. It's amazing. And so they're looking at more than just one model. They're looking at a few different, essentially, for lack of a better word, math equations, second order differentials, where they're solving solutions. And they're looking at them and saying, well, I think these 3 seem to be in agreement. These 2 maybe disagree. And so they're essentially kind of looking at averages. And this one cracks me up because essentially the guy goes through the list of like what they look at and lists them off. And so there's the NAM model, modern, detail-oriented, prolific, incredibly reactionary, which there's some truth to that. The GFS model, the model next door, quite old-fashioned and open book, a little easy on the eyes, and it just kind of goes through. And so the European one, ooh la la. So, but so the cool thing is all these models are actually available to the public to use. The problem is most of us don't have a meteorology degree and can't use them. I will say that the University of Washington, their meteorology department, especially if you're interested in Alaska, is amazing. You can waste hours on their website going through the different models and kind of learning and seeing. They've got the loops that rotate, and I mean, it's almost too much information, but you can really get a sense of like what's going on with the pressures, and then also what's going to happen in the future. This is a lot like what I would argue, some might disagree, but this is really kind of what has shaped climbing in Patagonia the last few years. Once upon a time, everyone would sit at Camp Birdwell and stare at their barometric pressure on their watch. Nowadays, everyone sits in town and eats empanadas and drinks wine. And then when the model says it's time to go, everybody runs in and does their route and runs back out. I'm essentially doing the same thing. I'm just hopping a 4-hour flight to Anchorage. And so, though I want to say, what was it, were we saying, Steve, was it this year or last year? Jesse Huey, a Boulder-based climber, was able to fly from Colorado to Patagonia, do a route, and fly back. And I think it was about a week, maybe a little less. Yeah. And so people are figuring it out.
So let's talk about some apps and what you look at.
So this is a screenshot. If you're an iPhone user, you would recognize this. I don't look at NWS or NOAA every day. I've got the bookmarks on my computer. However, what's faster for me is just to pick up my phone and open the phone app, the weather app, and just flip through. And, frankly, I find looking at the weather more productive than looking at social media. So I tend to look at the weather because it gets me stoked. And literally, if you looked at my phone right now in my hands, you would see that I've got Petersburg, which is near the Devil's Thumb. I've got Talkeetna, which is near the Central Range. And most of the time it looks like rain or clouds, but this screenshot here, you can see this was taken on a Thursday and you can see next week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whoa, that's a lot of sunshine. Now, does this mean to buy plane tickets? No. Does this mean to go open your computer?
I don't know if other people are seeing that, but I'm seeing that John froze a little bit there. Okay, yeah, John froze. So I'll continue his thought there while he unfreezes. If you guys can hear me, can people hear me? That he, you know, this is the time that people want to go in and look for some more information, open the computer and look at some of this. John, you froze. I was just filling in for you. This is when you want to open the computer and go into some more the next information and start to dig in, right?
Totally. Sorry about that. I don't know what it was. So this would be an example. The other thing you can do is there's a lot of other stuff on the internet. So a good example is NWS, because they're bored just writing forecasts on 43. There's a lot of Facebook pages for specific locations. This is the one for the National Weather Service, Alaska and Anchorage. You know, these groups do not have a lot of fans or followers, but I follow them all because they put really good stuff that gives you a good sense of what's going on in the range. Now, we all know, a good example of this is just because you have 5 days of good weather, sunshine, that doesn't matter if it dumped 10 feet of snow the week prior. And so this is one of kind of the important reasons why you need to kind of be checking every day to see what's going on in the area that you're interested in. And the NWS does a great job of summarizing, like, hey, what's going on? These were taken a few years ago, basically showing that it was a lean snow year. And so me as a climber, if I'm planning on going to Alaska in the spring, this tells me that, oh, maybe the ice routes I want to do, they might be a little thin this year. But if there's a ridge I want to do, low snow year commonly means smaller cornices. So maybe I want to think about ridges that year. It comes back to that, having that wish list of more than one climb.
That's great.
Another thing you can do is YouTube. NWS every day on 44 records a 2-minute and 30-second forecast that you can sit there and learn a ton and know what's going on. If you've got more than 2 minutes and 30 seconds on page 45.
It's incredible. They only have 650 subscribers for that kind of information, right?
I mean, in this day and age of like people when they're influencers and all that, like, these are the ones you should be following. Don't follow the people trying to get you stoked. Follow the people that are telling you when to go climbing.
Yeah.
So here's another one, Alaska weather. These guys do a 30-minute every day, but like if you're at work and, you know, passing the time, you can learn, if you listen to this for like a month, you can learn the weather really well. I kind of joke that I think I have a minor in meteorology at this point.
That's great. So I want to go down a quick diversion. Somebody asked about the chat, and it actually came up a couple times. Somebody mentioned a meteorologist based out of Jackson Hole named Jim Woodmansey. And somebody also asked me about weather forecasting for Pakistan expeditions. And those two things are related to me because Jim did a bunch of forecasting for me for my expeditions. He actually, first time I used him was in 2005 when Vince and I climbed Nanga Parbat. And so the way we would set that up is we would pay him a fee to do the forecast of the expedition, and he would kind of keep an eye on things. And then when we would watch things on the ground, and when we thought things were kind of coming together, we'd give him a call and be like, hey, it's looking pretty good here. Can you, like, you know, get out your crystal ball? And he would spend an hour or two doing all the research, and then he'd call us back. And in the case when we climbed Nanga Parbat, he forecast a 2-week high pressure system. so that was amazing. Like, it was the best possible. It was the best possible thing that could have happened to us.
Sharpen the tools. It's time to go.
Yeah. So, but before 2005, I never had a weather forecast of that type. When we were when I climbed K7 in 2004, it was just the old school. And I talked about this in my K7 talk a few months ago, where just like looking at the sky, looking at the barometer, looking at the wind direction, looking at the cloud forms, and making your own forecast. So that was what happened before. I would say that having a dedicated professional meteorologist is fairly expensive. I mean, it was like I think we've spent I don't know what it costs now. Back then it was around $1,000, $1,500, and I don't know what those guys charge now. I know there's an outfit out of Austria, out of Innsbruck, that does this quite a bit. So
I know for me, one of the reasons why I like Smash and Grab is because I know what the weather is supposed to be. Like I've seen the window, I bought the tickets, I'm going, I know the forecast, I nailed it. And so I essentially know that even if I wake up and, oh, it's a little cloudy, or, oh, there's a little bit of flurries, I know what's coming and I know that the weather's going to be good. And so for me and a lot of my Alaska climbing, not having to worry about the stress of, oh, is this weather going to turn on us? Or, oh, do we need to bail before we get caught on this route? Removing that stress off of the kind of the concerns we're trying to deal with as we did the route made it that much easier to focus on the other things. Like if it was a first ascent, like what is the best line? Like, I think I see this, should we go that way? Like it was one less variable to worry about. And so at least speaking for myself, if you remove one of those possible, for lack of a better word, excuses to quit, it makes you that much more able to focus on the task at hand and more likely be successful. And so I've always enjoyed, I think that's one of the things I've enjoyed about Smash and Grab. It also has allowed me to basically say, well, it's not going to be bad weather. I don't need Gore-Tex, I can climb in my little stretchy action suit and I'm fine. Maybe I can take the lighter blade jacket, So it's one of the, it's cheating in some ways. Maybe some would say. I like to say that I'm just really well aware of what I'm going to encounter en route, but I've always enjoyed knowing the fact that the weather's going to be good.
Yeah, so that's a great thing about this type of climbing. You're there for weather forecasts are quite good for 48 hours, and anything beyond that, I mean, they're getting better every year, I would say, but
yeah.
The quality beyond that starts to degrade, obviously. Let's wrap this up. I think we're almost out of time, and I just wanted to hit on one last thing. And you had some good tips about just how to make this as affordable as possible. I mean, it sounds expensive and intimidating to be jetting around to climbs, but I think there are some ways to do this within a normal budget.
So it can be expensive. What I did is, I think the last minute, as we all know, the closer you buy your plane ticket to go time, the more expensive it is. It can be very expensive for buying something that's 24 hours away. So being able to identify the window as soon as possible is critical. If you can catch it in 4 days out, 5 days out, and usually the better the window, the more likely they're going to forecast that a few days out. That's one piece. So there's a financial reward to learning the weather as good as possible. The other key, though, and this is kind of really the only way I've been able to do this over the years, is frequent flyer miles. Not that I fly a lot personally, at least when I was at Intel, but getting a credit card that gives you frequent flyer miles for the airline you're going to be flying on is critical. I think I have 2 credit cards now, but one of them is an Apple card, doesn't matter. But so I got an Alaska Airlines credit card pretty early on when I kind of knew I wanted to start going to Alaska. And, I'm going to sound a little bit old dad here, but credit cards are a great way to screw up your credit. But if you can be disciplined and only use it as much as you can afford per month, you can rack a lot of miles very quickly. Pay anything and everything you can on your credit card up to the ensuring you're going to pay it off at the end of the month, every month. And so as you accrue these miles, if you can spend $3,000 a month on your credit card and pay it off, suddenly once a year, you're going to have enough miles for a flight. Something else Alaska does, and I'm not affiliated with them. This is not like a recommendation for Alaska, but they do what's called a companion pass, where once a year they let you essentially buy an identical ticket to the ticket you're buying for $100. And so let's say you did have to buy a last minute plane ticket. Well, say it was an $800 ticket, like, double the normal price from flying from Portland to Alaska. You use the companion pass, which bumps the price to $900, but then you'd split it with your partner who's coming with you, because unless you're soloing, you need a partner. Then suddenly it's $450 each, and it's a little more tolerable. And so frequent flyer miles, racking them as frequently as often as possible, and then also using the companion pass are two ways to kind of make this a little cheaper as far as getting to Alaska.
Yeah,
and I'm sure like there's if you want to smash and grab something in Europe, then probably you're probably going to want to do something with either like Air France or Delta or somebody that has a lot of frequent flights to where you want to go and allows you to accrue those miles to be able to get there.
And that's a good point. I think that a lot of climbers that are based on the East Coast, like a city like Boston or New York, they may be thinking about going to Anchorage, but it's actually much closer to fly to Geneva than it is to Alaska. So you gotta think about those things.
Totally.
So well, somebody asked about getting to Talkeetna, and for smash and grab, I want to say you're pretty much committed to renting a car, because there are shuttles and other ways to do it, but you've got to rent a car because it's just the only thing that's time efficient enough. And you also got to remember that the car rental in Anchorage Airport is closed, from midnight to 4 a.m. or something? So you don't want to land on a red eye at 1 a.m. and then have to wait 3 hours for your car rental place to open. So
that's a really good example of know all your logistics, not just where are you going to land on the glacier and how you're going to do the approach to the climb you're going to do. Logistics start from when you land in the state that you're climbing in all the way to getting to the climb. And so, it's what are the hours of the rental car place? It's if you're landing at midnight, how are you going to get fuel for your stove?
Right.
Okay, REI is closed till 10 a.m. Can one of your local friends pick it up and have it for you? Are you going to fly with your food? If you're going to buy any food, which grocery stores are open 24 hours? There's a lot of little things that maybe we take for granted that you have to really solve, because if any one of them pops up on the way to your climb, because your window is so short, you missing one thing, like if you don't have fuel for the stove, there goes your trip. Who cares if the weather's perfect? Who cares if you're fit? You don't have fuel for your stove, it's not going to happen. And so you have to kind of be very methodical in your planning for these, which is easier to do if you've done a previous trip to that same area.
Yeah. And I would say one last thing we didn't talk about that I wanted to mention that's worked for me in the past is having climbing partners I know that live in the area. Like having, I have good friends that live in Chamonix, and if I was trying to do something in Chamonix and was somewhere else in Europe or on the East Coast and I could get in there, then that would be great. So I think
one of my buddies, Chris Lindsay, recently published Alaska Ice Guide. It's a great guidebook, but he is definitely, I got to give him a shout out, has picked me up stuff from REI more than once and left it outside his door, and we've gone by at midnight and grabbed some stuff on our way to Talkeetna.
So great. I think that's got me all excited to plan some quick hits out in the mountains for this coming year, and think about what climbs there are left that I really want to get done here in the next year or two. So thank you, John, for all the motivation, all the insights, all the information. It's really appreciated. And, for everyone who doesn't know, this will be on YouTube here shortly, and we'll live there for indefinitely. So anytime you want to refer to it or refer a friend to it, please point them to the Uphill Athlete YouTube channel or website under the videos tab. And we'll see you guys back here in the next couple of weeks. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
John, what was the name of the ice guy book author, or the ice guy? Somebody asked in the chat.
Chris Lindsay just came out.
Chris Lindsay. I'll ask
And
him.
if anyone has any other questions, like my email is on the Uphill website. You can send me emails.
John at uphillathlete.com.
I'm happy to help any way I can.
Great. Thanks so much, John.
Yep. Thanks, guys.